from troubled teenagers from dysfunctional families to teens seeking a thrill and some who reacted completely out of the ordinary. Teens are known for their outbursts, but rarely has it gone this terribly far. Here's how 10 teenage unalivers reacted to receiving their life sentences. Brian Draper and Tory Adamcik.
We're here in his car. The time is 9:50, September 22nd, 2006. Unfortunately, we have the grueling task of killing our two friends. I'm telling Cassie's family, but GI number one. We have to stick with the plan.
Cassie Jo Stoddart was doing what she would normally do on any ordinary day. She'd gone to school, hung out with her friends, and then went back home. On the night of September 22nd of 2006, Cassie was house-sitting at her aunt and uncle's home. No problem, she'd done this 100 times before, and it was worth the extra money they would give her. However, when Allison and Frank Contreras returned 2 days later, they were met with a shocking sight. Cassie was lying in a pool of her own blood. She'd been stabbed repeatedly. It looked like a scene straight out of a horror movie, gruesome and horrific. It seemed like whoever had attacked Cassie wanted to make sure she would pass away. It seemed like the person or people responsible hated her. Come to find out after an extensive investigation that it was none other than Brian Draper and Tory Adamcik, two of Cassie's schoolmates from Pocatello High School, and two people she'd believed were her friends. But why did they end Cassie's life? Well, the answer's in what we just said. They were inspired by a horror movie, the first film in the Scream franchise. On September 22nd, Cassie invited her friends, Brian, Tory, and Matt Beckham, to come over to her aunt and uncle's home to watch a movie. Sometime during the night, she gave the three guys a home tour before they went back up to resume watching the movie. What she didn't know was that Tory had secretly unlocked the basement door so he and Brian could come back later on and execute their plan. Before the movie had wrapped up, Brian and Tory made up an excuse, saying they had to go watch another movie at the movie theater and would be gone. Eventually, they came back with gloves, masks, and knives to carry out the unaliving. They first entered the home through the basement and then turned off the circuit breaker to lure Cassie and Matt to the basement. However, Matt called his mother, fearing something wasn't right, and asked Cassie to come back home with him. Cassie, though, refused, saying her aunt and uncle had entrusted her to look after the home. Once Brian and Tory heard Matt leaving, they turned the circuit breaker back on, slammed a few closet doors, and then snuck up behind Cassie, stabbing her over 30 times. According to the coroner's report, the first 12 were enough to end her life, but the boys went in for overkill. They eventually left the scene, and police discovered Cassie's body 2 days later when her aunt and uncle returned. Now the question was, who'd done it? Cassie's mother's boyfriend was a person of interest because his fingerprints were on the circuit breaker, and Matt was a suspect because he was the last person to see her alive. However, both suspects were cleared almost immediately, and the focus shifted back on Brian and Tory. When investigators asked them to describe the movie they'd seen after leaving Cassie's home, they couldn't recount any details. They claimed later that they had gone through cars, and then, when detectives told him he was in serious trouble, Brian confessed. Both boys blamed the other. Brian said that Tory pressured him, and Tory said it was wholly Brian's idea to unalive Cassie. At trial, the prosecution revealed that the two teens were inspired by Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, who committed the Columbine High School massacre, as well as the Scream horror film franchise. Both received a mandatory sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, plus 30 years to life for being convicted of conspiracy to commit unaliving. Devon Erickson and Alec McKinney.
It was narrowed down to Devon disliking the classmates he had in that classroom and saying that that was the most ideal place to do it because that was where most kids he hated would be at the same time.
In December 2018, a parent reported an anonymous complaint to the district that there was a high risk of violence and school shootings at the K-12 STEM school in Colorado. That parent was sued for defamation by the school. Then, in May of 2019, two teenagers, Devon and Alec, barged into school premises with weapons, ending the life of one child and injuring another 8. Alec, a 16-year-old transgender boy, was believed to have been the mastermind behind the attack. According to Devon, who was 18 at the time, he'd only gotten in on the plan the night before. Meanwhile, Alec had been planning it for weeks. He had initially only planned to target 2 of his bullies, but ultimately decided to inflict as much damage as he could before turning the trigger on himself. The boys had attended school that day as they normally would have, each finding excuses throughout the day to leave the classroom. They were scheduled to stay in class 108, but left early to execute their plan. They even picked out a few of their friends to come out of the classroom and increase their chances of survival. During the attack, Devon had propped his guitar case against the door to lock it and then tried to fire rounds at the students. One student, Kendrick Ray Castillo, leaped at Devon and was fatally shot in the chest. Then 2 other students lunged at Devon and managed to subdue him. Meanwhile, Alec fired several rounds into the classroom but was ultimately subdued as well. When the security guard reached the area, both boys surrendered. Both were charged with many counts and were charged as adults. Alec received life with the possibility of parole after 40 years, plus 38 more years for other counts. Devon was convicted on 46 counts, including first-degree unaliving, attempted first-degree unaliving, conspiracy, and supplying a gun to a minor. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 1,000 years. Alyssa Bustamante.
How did she die? 9-year-old girls don't just die.
We were messing around, and she fell back and hit her head.
On October 21, 2009, 9-year-old Elizabeth Alton was asked by a friend of hers to come out and play. Nothing was out of the ordinary, except this time, her friend asked if they could go play in the forest. This was odd, but Elizabeth didn't question it. She also didn't question why her friend's older sister, 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante, had tagged along too. When they reached the forest, Alyssa asked her sister to stay behind and told Elizabeth she had something to show her deeper into the forest. Elizabeth complied. Once they were out of sight, Alyssa strangled Elizabeth before she stabbed her a couple of times and slit her throat. She then proceeded to dump the young girl's body in a shallow grave she'd dug up just a week ago. Obviously, this was a planned attack, but what had Elizabeth done to anger Alyssa this much? Well, nothing. According to prosecutors, Alyssa was motivated to carry out the attack simply because she wanted to feel the thrill that came with unaliving someone. Investigators quickly caught up to Alyssa a day later and found a journal entry from the day she'd unalived Elizabeth. In it, she claimed that once she got over the uneasy feeling of having just taken a life, she began to feel amazing. Later on, she ironically went to church. While her defense team tried to argue that Alyssa was a troubled child who came from a broken home and had depression and a personality disorder, the judge believed she was dangerous and handed her 2 sentences: life with the possibility of parole and 30 years. Aiden Fucci.
It's very serious.
This isn't no joke. This is your whole life. Your whole life.
And hers.
And ours. And your brothers and sisters. And don't forget they can't go to school tomorrow.
Why?
Because the kids will harm them.
When investigators found Tristan Bailey's body, they were shocked. Someone had stabbed her over 100 times. But Tristan was a beloved student at Patriot Oaks Academy. She was part of the cheerleading team and was an overall popular student. Meanwhile, Aiden Fucci was the complete opposite. He wasn't bullied, he was the bully. Aiden had a list of disciplinary issues, and he was generally the sort of person Tristan would stay away from. Had it not been for surveillance footage captured from the night of her unaliving, investigators might never have been able to tie him as a suspect. On May 9, 2021, Mother's Day, Aiden texted Tristan after he got her number from someone, asking her to hang out with him and another friend, someone Tristan knew. She agreed, and the two were seen on camera walking away. Later on, Aiden was seen running back with his shoes in his hands and his clothes clearly bloodied. When asked, Aiden claimed he was innocent at first. He later said that Tristan had attempted to touch his private parts, he'd shoved her away, and she fell and hit her head. Eventually, during the trial, several classmates and friends testified that Aiden had often talked about unaliving someone. He was obsessed with gore and believed Tristan would be the perfect victim. Residents of St. Johns County were shocked that something like this could have happened. After listening to the heartbreaking testimony from Tristan's family members, a judge handed Aiden a life sentence. Aiden eventually agreed to the crime and reportedly continues to boast about it while he's incarcerated. TJ Lane.
Saying to pull the trigger to kill your son, you know, basically memory.
Back in 2012, the quiet town of Chardon, Ohio, was shaken by something no one expected from a teenager. 17-year-old TJ Lane walked into his high school cafeteria one morning and opened fire on his fellow students. The scene was chaotic, with classmates running for safety, and tragically, 3 students lost their lives while several others were left injured. TJ didn't have a clear personal grudge against those he targeted. Investigators later revealed that the shooter had been dealing with deep-rooted emotional struggles and feelings of anger, isolation, and resentment. He had written dark notes and seemed to fantasize about violence long before that day. It wasn't an impulsive act. When TJ was brought to trial, the courtroom was filled with grieving families, classmates, and community members looking for answers. Instead of remorse, the shooter shocked everyone by wearing a white t-shirt with the word "Unaliver" scrawled across it and even smirking during the proceedings. This disturbing behavior only added to the outrage and pain felt by those who had already lost so much. The prosecution argued that TJ had carefully planned his actions, and the evidence strongly backed that up. His defense team tried to raise questions about his mental health, but the jury and judge were unmoved by his demeanor and the weight of the evidence against him. Ultimately, TJ was found guilty of aggravated unaliving and other related charges. He was sentenced to 3 life terms in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge made it clear that TJ would never walk free again. Woodham.
And so we broke up, and I always, every day, had to face Christina and Melissa every day for almost a year now. And over the summer, I kind of got better because...
Back in October of 1997, Pearl, Mississippi became the center of a tragedy that no one in the community could have imagined. 16-year-old Woodham first attacked his mother at home and then turned his attention to Pearl High School. 2 students were unalived and several more were left injured. Luke had been drawn into a small circle of teens fascinated with dark, cult-like ideas. Combined with his own struggles with rejection, bullying, and emotional challenges, it created a dangerous mix that ultimately pushed him toward destruction. Prosecutors laid out evidence showing that Luke had carefully prepared for the attack. Notes he left behind showed intent, leaving little room to argue that this was a spontaneous act. The prosecution emphasized his choices, making clear that he knew exactly what he was doing when he carried out the plan. Luke received 3 life sentences for the lives lost, plus 140 additional years for the injuries and chaos he caused. In simple terms, it meant he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Loukaitis.
Until the U.S. Supreme Court ruled we can't send kids to prison without the possibility of parole.
The sisters say they didn't even realize how deeply they needed to hear "I'm sorry," and that the letter answered a lot of questions they and likely the other victims' families had about Loukaitis.
When Joanne Phillips discovered her husband had been having an affair, her entire worldview shifted. She started to isolate and talk about ending her life. She even convinced her son, 14-year-old Loukaitis, to end his life with her on Valentine's Day, 96. While Barry tried to pick up the pieces, his mother was too far gone. Later, a court-appointed psychiatrist testified that Barry had been suffering from depression. However, the prosecution argued that Barry had premeditated the shooting that took the lives of 3 people at Frontier Middle School, 2 of his classmates and his algebra teacher, and he was reportedly inspired by Stephen King's novel, Rage. In the novel, a teen holds his algebra class hostage, much like what Barry did. On February 2, 1996, Barry went to school in a Wild West get-up, armed with a hunting rifle and 2 semi-automatics. His plan was to unalive 1 student, a bully, and then hold the class hostage while he made his getaway. However, he ended up taking 3 lives in the commotion. When John Lane, the gym teacher, reached the classroom, he managed to convince Barry to let the students go and use him for negotiations with the police instead. While walking down the hallway, John managed to overpower Barry and hand him over to the police. While several people were sympathetic to Barry's personal struggles, it wasn't enough to justify what he'd done. A judge believed that he should receive the maximum sentence, 2 life terms, but Barry was later reconvicted and received a 189-year sentence, aka de facto life sentence. Kip Kinkel.
I don't know the guy. I never will. I'm angry to see all the hate that runs through other people, all the pain. I feel that I got off quite light. I don't have the emotional fear that a lot of people do. I don't fear loud sounds. I don't have nightmares.
Springfield, Oregon, was just another quiet town until the spring of 1998, when everything changed because of 15-year-old Kip Kinkel. He had been dealing with mental health struggles, was obsessed with weapons, and was battling dark thoughts he wrote about in his journals. Teachers and classmates had noticed troubling behavior, and just a day before the tragedy, he'd been suspended for bringing a gun to school. He later said he heard voices and felt tormented, and all of it built up until he finally acted on it. First, Kip turned on his parents at home. The next morning, he brought multiple guns to Thurston High School and opened fire in the cafeteria during breakfast. Students were caught completely off guard as chaos broke out. 2 classmates lost their lives, more than 20 were hurt, and it only ended when other students bravely tackled him to the ground. Later, investigators found writings where he expressed anger, paranoia, and hopelessness. His defense argued he was suffering from serious mental illness and wasn't fully in control of what he did. But in the end, the judge gave him more than 100 years in prison without the chance of parole. That meant Kip would never walk free again. Nikolas Cruz.
His body was blocking the door and holding it open. So it was very, scary for us because we didn't know what to do. And with all of us crying and, whispering to each other, it was pretty loud, I can say. Especially with our door open, it kind of echoed into the hallway.
Right. Valentine's Day in 2018 should have been an ordinary school day in Parkland, Florida, but instead it became one of the darkest days in U.S. history. 19-year-old Nikolas Cruz, who had been expelled from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, entered the campus carrying a rifle and ammunition. Nikolas's past was filled with troubling behavior, including aggressive outbursts, fascination with guns, and disturbing social media posts. Classmates and teachers had raised concerns, and law enforcement had even received tips about him, but no action was taken. Moving through the hallways and classrooms, he opened fire on students and staff. By the time the shooting ended, 17 lives were lost, and another 17 were left injured. Nikolas tried to slip away in the crowd, but was arrested shortly after. When Nikolas faced trial, the focus shifted to whether he should be sentenced to death or spend his life in prison. His defense team admitted what he had done, but highlighted his traumatic childhood and mental health struggles, asking the jury to choose life without parole. In October 2022, the jury delivered its decision: life in prison without parole. For many families, the sentence felt like a disappointment, as they believed the scale of the tragedy deserved a capital penalty. Still, it ensured that Nikolas would never be free again. Ethan Crumbley.
Brief encounter ends. Ethan is only concerned about his cat, Dexter.
When news broke out of Oxford High School on November 30th, 2021, the first reports were confusing. Students rushing out of classrooms, parents gathering outside, and word that someone had opened fire inside the building. Within hours, the details became clear. 4 students had lost their lives, several more were hurt, and the shooter was a 15-year-old sophomore, Ethan Crumbley. His arrest was quick. He was found with the gun his father had purchased only days earlier. Investigators later confirmed that the weapon had been described by his mother as a gift. Teachers had already noticed troubling behavior from Ethan in the days before the shooting. His drawings showed weapons, blood, and phrases asking for help. On the morning of the attack, his parents, James and Jennifer Crumbley, were called to the school for a meeting. Staff showed them his notes and raised concerns about his well-being. The parents refused to take him home, and Ethan was sent back to class with the gun still in his backpack. Hours later, the shooting began. Inside the school, students and staff reacted quickly. Some barricaded classroom doors, others hid, and many sent text messages to their families. Teachers tried to protect students while police were called to the scene. 4 students were unalived: Tate Meyer, Madison Baldwin, Hannah St. Juliana, and Justin Schilling. 7 others, including a teacher, were injured. Ethan was taken into custody soon after the attack. Prosecutors announced that he would be charged as an adult. He faced 24 charges, including murder, hurt, and terrorism, causing unaliving. The terrorism charge was meant to reflect the impact on the entire school and community. Ethan first pled not guilty, but evidence collected by investigators included videos, journal entries, and internet searches describing his plans. In October 2022, he pled guilty to all charges. Attention then turned to his parents. James and Jennifer Crumbley were charged with involuntary unaliving. Prosecutors said they failed to secure the weapon and ignored signs that their son was in trouble. After charges were announced, the parents were found in Detroit and arrested. Prosecutors presented evidence showing that the shooting had been planned. The defense argued that Ethan's age and mental health should be considered. On December 8, 2023, the judge sentenced him to life in prison without parole. At the time of sentencing, Ethan was 17 years old.